Hello, my name's Dale Little with Rescue American Ministries here in Chesnedea, Romania. And I bet you thought that the what we now call the Trump derangement syndrome started with Donald Trump. I found a case where it goes back several years before he announced his candidacy, at least 2 years anyway. And just listen for a few minutes, see if you don't see the similarities. It was not Donald Trump that was the first target with this. And I can't prove that this one particular one is. There may have been more before, but it's one that I came across just the last couple of days. You'll be shocked at who the victim is that they first hated so bad that caused this reaction that you see now towards Donald Trump, a hatred that just goes beyond reason. I'll go ahead and tell you right now. The victim was the little red hen. Yeah, that's right. The little red hen received the same targeting, the same charges, basically, that you hear about President Donald Trump. Let me go on and get on with this. This woman named Myra Zeff wrote an article about the little red hen, a chicken with a love of the moral high ground. She seems to have a problem with that. There is a moral high ground. Now, everybody that claims to be on it is not, but that doesn't change the fact that there is a moral high ground, regardless of what she thinks. Let's see what she says. What's the problem with the little red hen? Zeff says, I love traditional folk tales, Rumpelstiltskin, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Little Red Riding Hood. Maybe it's the visuals, all those deep, dark forests, turreted castles, medieval townscapes. Maybe it's the blunt dichotomies of rich, poor, and good and bad. Or maybe it's the magic. These simple stories have a mysteriously universal appeal that somehow transcends both centuries and cultures. But there's always an exception. And for me, it's that horribly self-righteous nag, the little red hen. I dislike the story because of its didactic sledgehammer, Zeff says, but if I'm really honest, I just really don't like her as a person. Yeah, as a person. She's mean-spirited and whiny, bossy and smug, and worst of all, she wallows in her self-martyrdom. We are talking about a fairy tale, and we're not talking about a person, we're talking about a little red hen. But she sees it as a person, and yeah, every bit as deranged as the worst case of Trump derangement syndrome you might see today. Even at that, you do remember, too, that the little red hen is a fairy tale. As I said, I mentioned that. Of course, yeah, we all know that. You remember the little red hen first found some grains of seed and grains of wheat, and asked the other critters in the barnyard to help her to plant. And so it goes that not I grunted the pig, not I purred the sleepy cat, not I squealed the rat. And later, after harvesting the wheat, she had to take it to the mill and ask her to help do that. And step by step, that each one had to be taken to get a loaf of bread from this wheat. The answers were always the same, not I. When it came to asking for help. And so when she finally gets it baked, she says, well, who will help eat the bread? And they all said, I will. But the little red hen said, no, you won't, I will. And she did. For that, she drew the ire of this woman. And that is what blind hatred does. It cannot be reasoned. It cannot reason, and it cannot be reasoned with. This progressive humanist, that's the way she identifies herself, had this meltdown over a fairy tale in 2013, 2 years before Donald Trump announced his bid for the presidency. Does all this sound familiar? Yeah, it sure does, doesn't it? I'm beginning to think that Mark Dice is probably right. And a lot of you may know him, some don't. He's got a YouTube channel, but he says that he's, for a good while now, that liberalism is a mental disease, a mental disorder. And he's got a T-shirt that says, liberalism, find a cure. And I'm beginning to believe what he's been saying. Let's look at more similarities to the Trump derangement syndrome that this woman has for the little red hen. The writer continues to explain her hatred of the hen, and that's what she does later on. She kept her plans to herself like a control freak. Or did she explain that she really needed help? No, she didn't. Did she sit out the possible consequences of the decision? No. Well, did she have to? I don't see. I mean, these were barn animals, same as she was. Wasn't little kids. No, she conned them, she says, into thinking they had a real choice. And why? Because she planned this little lesson all along. Worst of all, they were given no chance to redeem themselves or to make it up to her. I feel a bit better, she says now, that I've got my hatred for this little red hen out into the open. So there you have it. Hatred for a little red hen, a fairy tale, because she's letting her imagination run wild. I read the story. I was looking for this little red hen story where I came across this one because I wanted to refresh myself on it. And as I was looking, I come across this. But I went back and I did read the story of the little red hen. I don't see any of this. I mean, it takes somebody that's really deranged to see this in something like that. I mean, as I said, it's a fairy tale. The writer wrote what he said into it, and he painted the characters as being lazy, and she's trying to bring them alive and say, well, maybe it's this way or that way, completely different from the facts of the book. And she goes on and she convinces her kids then of how bad the little red hen is. And she says we invented multiple scenarios. And, she doesn't like any kind of religious books, any kind of books that sets out that it's basically a standard. And she said they should be able to make decisions without the framework of religion around us to prompt us. In actual fact, we are in the ultimate position to develop their ethical radar, talking about children, simply because of our freedom to question. For us, there isn't one text from which to derive values, but a whole world of questions waiting to be asked. From fairy tales alone, there are springboards galore. Were Hansel and Gretel right to murder the witch? Should Goldilocks have got away with trashing the bear's house? This is so ridiculous. It defies, well, as I said before, it does. It defies reason and the hatred of the left that the left has for those unlike them is beyond reason. She talks about asking all these questions. She doesn't. This is what gets me. She doesn't like answers. She likes questions, but why ask questions if you don't like answers? That's just beyond me. What we see is a lot of accusations and assumptions about things, especially Little Red Hen. And what we see here is that President Trump is not the cause of Trump derangement syndrome. The disease has been there, festering all along. It only took Donald Trump to draw it out. And so, like it's never been drawn out before. But One of the earliest victims may have been the Little Red Hen. How sad. Dale Little, Rescue America Ministries,